right. Thank you, Mabel. So hi, good afternoon, everybody. I hope everybody can hear me well and clear. Please just point out to Mabel if the connection on my side is not very clear or I get cut off from time to time. And so you can let her know to remind me to repeat myself in case you miss something or I accidentally miss over something due to the connection issue. So today, this will be a platform training for the Springerlink platform for you, the users of University Malaysia Terengganu. So I'm Ken Diap. I'm the licensing manager for Malaysia and Brunei, and my responsibilities are actually just basically working with librarians to ensure end users like yourself, researchers, students, etc., research lecturers, getting what you need to be able to do what you do best, which is either conducting research, writing your manuscripts or things like literature review for students, helping to get information necessary for them to complete their assignments, and also helping them to write their thesis at the end. So it's just some background in terms of what's available for as users from UNT from Springerlink. At the moment, from the platform Springerlink, you guys have access to 1,500 Springer, Palgrave, and other society-based journals that publish with Springer on the Springerlink platform, with varying years of content, and most of them typically ranging from as old as, manuscripts published from 1997 all the way to the current year here in 2020. Also, very important to note as well, and that the UMT library has also provided to its users a very large collection of Springer ebooks from many different copyright years, some as old as a couple of decades ago, all the way up to very, very recent published titles as well. And there are a total of 47,000, over 47,000 over books that includes things like textbooks, professional titles, what we call encyclopedias, monographs, or even chapter books as well, from different kinds of subject areas, including those from the physical sciences side, like science and technology and engineering and medicine, all the way to those in the social sciences side as well, including the likes of humanities, religion, political science, business, marketing, and etc. Right? So for the purpose of the training, I will actually go ahead and turn off my webcam just in case connect face towards the end of this presentation, just in case. This training, before we head over to the platform, there are a few things that I wanted to use as a precursor to the training itself. So I've devised two different hypothetical scenarios for today's training. The first one, where it is, and they're both based on potential, a scenario where a student or a researcher is looking to do some research on a certain area. And the first one we're going to use today is actually I've devised is the environmental impact of overfishing of fish species in coastal waters of Malaysia. And then the other one is more on the social sciences side, which I've titled Consumer Receptiveness Towards Targeted Online Marketing Ads and Their Effectiveness on Converting Leads to Transactional Customers. So by using these two examples, hopefully I'll be able to touch on the different functions, the different things you could do on the platform, and how the platform itself and the resources on top of it would be able to make your life easier whenever you're trying to do what it is that you've come to the platform in the first place. All right. So I've been asked to remind everybody as well that before we proceed to the actual Springerlink platform, that you, especially when with the current situation where a lot of us are working away from campus or are forced to work at home or to do research at home, and even and for those of you who are teaching and learning, you are very heavily reliant on the digital resources that are brought to you by your individual library. So for UMT, right, please always remember to first visit your library website, which is here, psnz.umt.edu.my. And the first thing you should do is always go to your e-resources page, click on it. All right. Although there is a list of all of the different databases and journals that are currently subscribed by library, because most, if not all of us that are on the call right now are actually operating from our homes or from a distant location, not connected to the network of the university, please always remember to log into your Easy Proxy portal first, all right, by putting your username and passwords. And I believe if you don't, if you're unsure of the details for this particular login process, you can always reach out to your librarians. There's also a chatbot over here, or you can, if you know a librarian per se, you can always reach out to them to help you resolve these issues. And it's very important you do so, because the following steps that we are going to go on to now would not work or would not work properly if you do not go through this process at first. Once you've logged in, you'll be redirected to the e-resources page again. I'll show you here. And from there, you'll be able to see a list of, again, all of the different databases that are subscribed by UT. So Springerlink is actually down here. If you click on it and you see this hyperlink over here, it would then redirect you to Springerlink homepage. Okay, so this is where we begin. So the first thing I would like everybody to take note of, and to maybe perhaps one of the few things to remember from this training, is of course the URL for the database itself. So on Google, you could just Google Springerlink and be the first of the search query return to be listed at the top, and you click on it and you'll be here. But specifically, its URL is actually link.springer.com. This is not to be confused with another Springer homepage, which is springer.com. That one is usually meant on the commercial side. So if you're looking for resources like journal articles and ebooks, like what we are here doing today, make sure you come to the right platform, which is link.springer.com. Right? Next, if you had logged on to your Easy Proxy website, or if you had been registered as an authenticated user in the past, and you're still having those access logged in due to your browser remembering your access as a user, as an authenticated user, you should be able to see this box over here in purple. Right? If you are looking at this box, and I encourage all of you to actually play along or to do your own experimentation or practice a little while I'm also explaining how this is done. Perhaps you can just practice doing what I'm doing at using your own search terms, etc. while I'm doing this. So if you've seen this box in purple, this means that you have logged in correctly. All right. This should mean that if you scroll to the bottom of the page, you would see that you would be a recognized user of University Malaysia Trungkang. So there should be some wording that at the bottom here says logged in as an affiliate of University Malaysia Trungkang. Okay, so that's very important. Why, again, you must ensure that you log in through the Easy Proxy access, especially when you are utilizing this platform from a mobile device, or from your home Wi-Fi, or from even an internet cafe somewhere else. Okay, moving on. So let me just first explain a little bit about this homepage itself. So this platform is designed in a way where it's not supposed to be complicated. In fact, I think if you had enough time to play around with it, to press all of the different buttons and the links and to try out, do a little practice here and there, I would imagine most of us would have the ability to perhaps utilize 80% of all of the functionality on this platform itself without even having to go to any official or proper training. Well, that's the whole purpose of platforms like this. It's not aimed at making it difficult. In fact, it's aimed at the total opposite, which is to make life more simpler and easier and time-saving for very busy people like lecturers and researchers as yourself. Right? So perhaps the next thing that I would recommend, but this is not necessarily a must-do, is that you could create a what you call a profile for yourself on Springerlink by clicking on the top here, which says sign up or login. So click on it. All right. If you don't have an account, if you've never registered before, you can go ahead and fill in the information. And all it requires actually is a working email address and a password that you could use to log in again. And why would you want to do this? Well, basically, normally the reason for this though is again that there is a functionality on the back end of this platform, which is once you have been authenticated, if you have created a user account before on the platform, and once you log in and you've gone through the authentication process, for example, like your UMP proxy, the account would remember your authentication, so that in case you forgot to log into the Easy Proxy in the past, or are not able to log into the Easy Proxy due to some technical error on the library side, or you were using a totally different device that perhaps was not recognized by the internal networks, you could still log into your own username and account, and you could still provide you the exact same access rights to the content subscribed by the. Okay. So those are just some of the important reminders. Now we can move on to the functionalities of the platform itself. So the platform on the home page is divided into three main areas. First of which is the search bar at the top. So this is where I think typically where most people immediately when they come to the platform, this is where they would start, and they would just go ahead and in the search terms of which they are interested in. But I always caution that this is not necessarily the best strategy to use unless you already know what you're doing and you understand how the formula of which how the platform utilizes those search terms to look for the right kinds of manuscripts or chapters that you are actually really looking for, or else what would happen is you would end up with just an enormous amount of possibly related content, but you would spend too much time sorting through it and then not really having in the end the right information you look for, and you would probably waste too much time by then, and that would have caused a lot of frustration as well. Right, moving on. So I'll actually touch on what are some of the good tips that you could utilize to ensure that you don't encounter such a situation. The next part is this menu on the left hand side of the page, where we've actually divided the content, all of the different types of content, into its subject matter categories. So as you can see, I believe there are over 21 different subject areas that I believe pretty much covers almost everything under the sun. And I'm also pretty sure that it also covers most, if not all, of the different subject disciplines that are both researched or taught in UMT. All right. Moving on, and finally to the third part, which is more towards the middle right section of the page, you can see that we've also provided links to the different types of content that are available on Springerlink itself. So there's a link to just the journals. If you want to see only journals, books, this is for series of books. These are for protocols or lab experimentation protocols, step-by-step procedures on how to achieve a certain experiment outcome, for example. Reference works, or some people know them as encyclopedias, exemplified by this particular one at the bottom, and also conference proceedings, which are also fairly popular amongst researchers. If we scroll to the bottom here, as of today, so this is a live number. This number is updated every time a new chapter, a book, conference proceeding, or an encyclopedia is updated. At the moment, there are over 13 million, if I'm not mistaken, 13,300,000 individual pieces of documents, or scientific documents, on Springerlink itself. And I'm very happy to note that what I showed you earlier in the slides is that UMT actually has a vast majority of access to the journal side of it. So you have a majority of all of these articles listed over here. And you also have quite a large chunk of all chapters, the conference papers, and the reference works as well. So again, the library has done a very good job in trying to cover as many bases as possible for you guys to be able to do what you do best. So going back to the hypothetical scenarios, right? So the first one that I'm going to try and use today again is the environmental impact of overfishing of native fish species in coastal waters of Asia. So I think when trying to look for information, and the whole purpose of going to platforms like Springerlink is for you to go there and get information. You're looking for information either to support your hypothesis, looking for other research done to help you in your literature review, to help you to support your ideas and thoughts or your potential experimental outcomes that you're looking for. And by doing so, I think the first step is not necessarily to immediately drill down to what you think you may be specifically looking for. And that tends to be a potential trap that a lot of young and early researchers, or perhaps, for example, undergraduate students who are first exposed to these kinds of platforms, is that they immediately go and take, for example, their assignment title or that entire title that I had earlier and just go ahead and copy and paste it. So what tends to happen if, for example, if I did that, and I think a lot of it already know this, is that what you will get in the end is a mishmash of different things that are not necessarily exactly related to what you are looking for. And the important point to note is that we need to look at context rather than a word-by-word explanation of exactly what you're looking for, because of the way how the formula of the search bars and how the information is stored on the platforms, not just here on Springerlink, but also all of the other platforms are managed or the way they're set up. So for example, if as what I just did, I just copy paste the entire line and I received 915 results. Now this is actually quite good, because in most of the cases where you had a very complicated, very specific title, for example, of a research procedure, what you often get is almost zero or almost zero results, and that is what is quite commonly found as a complaint or a feedback that we get a lot from younger researchers, where they straight away say that, well, I tried to look for something on your platform, on Springerlink, for example, or even on many other platforms, and I was not able to find a single article that was related. So again, I would say maybe this is not necessarily the first thing you should do, especially if you don't really know what is the best way in order to look for the context of the different subject matters within the title itself, in order to really find content that is suitable for you, and perhaps in the end will ultimately contribute towards that literature review that you're writing on. So my way that I find that that tends to be what works best for me, and also I've also learned from several other more experienced researchers out there, is to look at it from a funnel effect. So if you understand the shape of a funnel, it starts very wide and then it narrows towards the bottom, and that to me is how research or looking for literature review should really be done. Although it sounds a bit counterintuitive, because when I was talking earlier about how you should be saving time and doing things quickly, but I also think that it helps to give a better understanding of what exactly you are looking for. So typically what I would tend to do is, for example, if I was in this scenario right now, I'm looking for journal articles to help me support, to learn a little bit more about the context of what I'm doing. One way I could start is by first, if I came to this platform, I could utilize this feature here by clicking on the journals first, right? And then what you will see is that there is this page where it returns all of the results, of which these are the 3,650 different individual journals that are currently hosted on Springerlink. So then I have to think about that title itself. So the title was Environmental Impact, Overfishing, Native Species, Fisheries, and also Malaysia as a context. So if I look at this on the left-hand side of the page, you can see that there is a what you call a filter function, where by clicking on the journal link that I did on the previous page, I've actually already pre-filtered all of the journal-only content, which is how I've arrived at this 365, right? So next thing I could do is perhaps look at the individual disciplines. So if I click all, for example, I could scroll down and look at the different types of subject matters that I think more falls into the context of what I'm looking for. So maybe perhaps based on that title, I'm looking at things like life sciences, right? So what that has done is actually it's narrowed down that 3,000 over results into 379. This again is in the effect of the funnel effect that I mentioned earlier. So you start large, you try to narrow down to exactly what you're. And then if once I've already filtered the discipline to perhaps something that I'm more looking for, let's look at the subdiscipline. So environmental impact, overfishing, coastal waters, etc., etc. So I may be looking at things like, for example, freshwater and marine. When I've done that, I've narrowed the list even further from 379 to only 29. So I think this is one good practice that I think that we should start with. And it also gives you an idea as a researcher what's available out there in terms of literature in your subject discipline or your area of research. As I believe not all of us are extremely aware of every single journal or every single kind of resource, or every single book that's available in the world of science. So this also provides a good way of looking at what are the different kinds of journals that are out there that possibly may be related to what I'm looking at. So by just scrolling down this list, I can see already several that have titles that are slightly related or maybe quite related to exactly what I'm looking for. You can also filter the list, 39, by making sure that the list only gives you the latest content by sorting it through newest first. All right, you can also amend the date of publish in case you're only looking at journals that have a publication from a certain year to another year. All right, so just by taking one example, I'm going to use this one, I think which I saw earlier, reviews in fish biology and fisheries. Going inside of it, just taking into context the title that I'm looking at, and then comparing that to the journal itself and seeing whether or not this is something that's worth my time to look at and to see whether or not I would be able potentially to find an information that may be valuable to me, my literature review or my assignments or my thesis writing on. So this is now the home page for a journal, right? So you can see that there is the title of the front cover of the journal. If there was a physical copy you can find in your library, the title itself. There are some quick links over here, and also a short description of what the journal is all about. And by reading, for example, Reviews in Fish Biology and Fisheries is a quarterly international journal which publishes original and peer and review articles on varied aspects of fisheries biology. And the subject matter is focused including on evolutionary biology, biography, etc. I can then begin to understand whether or not this title is again relevant or not relevant to me. So typically, if you start to see information where it contradicts or is completely in tangent on what you should be reading, or is not of your interest at all, even if it's purely on the basis of just gaining more knowledge on the areas that you're looking at, then you could just perhaps go back to this step and look at another journal. So let's say in this context, I feel that yes, this journal looks a little bit interesting. And I think to know a little bit more, it'd be good to also look at the aims and scope, which you can click at the top of the page. So by going in again, this provides a little bit more in-depth information on the types of papers that are published in this journal, what areas they're looking at, and also for those of you who are intending to submit manuscripts in the future, two journals that you cite, as I found that there is quite a common practice for Malaysia, is that whether or not in the end, ultimately, after the long process of writing a manuscript, is this title one of the potential titles that I might also be thinking about submitting my manuscript into, because it has a lot of relevant information towards the kind of work I've been doing and I've been writing in my own manuscript, for example. All right, so that's one useful function here on the journal homepage. So let's go back there. Scrolling a little bit further down, you can see who is the editor-in-chief, whether or not this journal, for example, has an open access option. So for those of you who are familiar, there are several types of open access options for authors in order to publish their content in either green or gold open access. So this one says hybrid, so which means this journal accepts both the traditional paid, we call it paywall type manuscript, meaning for authors, there's no cost publication, but if you want to make it an open access paper, you could do so individually still publishing in this journal, right? You can also see the impact factor, which was last recorded, and this was reported in 2018. So this journal has a 3.506 impact factor. It's actually the 2-year impact factor. You can see the 5-year impact factor over here. For those of you who are interested to know, for example, how long it takes if I were to submit a paper to this journal, and how long it takes for them to let me know, for example, if my paper was first accepted or rejected. This one says 43 days, and it's going to be different for every single title, even they are all under the same publisher. Also, you can see here 222 days for submission to acceptance. So this means after your manuscript has been submitted and it's been accepted, gone through peer review, made revisions, on average, it takes 222 days all the way to the end where it gets finally accepted and then it goes into preprint process. And also look at the popularity of the journal itself, on how many downloads there are since for the year 2019. Also, just to help you gauge on perhaps how many other researchers around the world are also looking at the articles within this journal, right? And if we scroll a little bit lower, there's a link for you here for you to scroll to open all of the different volumes of this title. So this one has started publishing with us since 1991, volume 1, as you can see. And the latest one is obviously 20, which is the March issue, which is the first issue of the year. If you click on that, it will bring you to the list of all of the individual articles that are published in this volume 30, issue 1 of March. Okay. Just before we go there, go in deeper into the individual articles. We can look at the latest articles again. This is where I, in this hypothetical, start to gauge whether or not this journal is relevant or not relevant, what I would be looking for in terms of topic, context of the information, and other things that I think may be relevant to my research. If you scroll again a little bit more to the bottom, you can see further more information about its ISSN and also whether or not it's indexed. I think for Malaysia, what's very important is either not it's indexed in Scopus or ISI. So for this one, you can see it is for both, perhaps something very useful in order for some of us who are utilizing some of this indexation to ensure that this journal, for example, is either in Q1 or Q2 on its subject category hierarchy. Okay, so that's the home page. I'll just go back to the current volume of this journal and find that these are the again the volume is divided, one journal volume. The volumes are divided into different papers. So these are the individual manuscripts within each of the published volumes. You can see all listed as different types of paper. This journal accepts different types of papers, reviews, and there are original research papers here. Sometimes you also get commentaries and also editorial publishing pieces where perhaps there is some commentary written by the editor himself. So by clicking, let's say I find this journal, for example, as, and maybe the thing that I feel that it would be interested further, I just click on it, and that should bring me to the HTML version of this paper itself, right? So what you're looking at here is a live version of the article, The Future Barriers of Trapping Methods in the Sea, Lamprey, etc., etc. And this is, you can only see this version if you were connected to the internet, because this is a live version. And one of the great features of this particular live version is that it amends itself in terms of, for example, number of words per line and how the different sections of the page is lined up and fits into whatever device that you're using. So if you had, for example, you're using a standard 14-inch laptop, you'll be seeing exactly what what I'm seeing right now. Or if you were using a mobile device like your phone, for example, you'd be actually seeing a more rearranged version whereby the platform is smart enough to help to prioritize certain sections that are more relevant or important to be looking at. So perhaps on your mobile phone, what you'll be seeing is you won't necessarily see this right-hand side of this page, but you'll be able to read more in larger font, for example, this abstract portion here, right? And if you were using perhaps, for example, a large screen TV to connect through a browser on the internet, then this will all get arranged in a much larger format as well. So that's one of the advantages of this HTML format. Another great advantage is that you can see that it has different kinds of features on the right hand side. So you can scroll through very quickly to the different sections of the journal article just by using this feature and then scrolling very quickly. So when you're doing your literature review and just researching for different information, typically what you want to look at is, okay, read the abstract a little bit, understand, okay, maybe there are some points here that I could use in this paper, look at the introduction, and then perhaps go all the way to the summary and see whether or not it is maybe performing the same kind of experiment or has a similar outcome, but in a different context, in a different country that you could still use for your paper. All right, so that's one of the features of this HTML format. You also get to see through the HTML format the full-size images or tables or graphs, like the one that I showed you, like the one I'm showing here. These are the exact same files that are submitted by the author when they submit their manuscripts to be published. So again, instead of looking at, for example, a traditional PDF format, this particular image in a PDF would be quite small, it would be quite squished, and you wouldn't be able to necessarily get the crisp images of it. This may not be so important to those of us. For example, this image is just purely of a map, although it is still quite detailed. But for those of us who are perhaps working in the life science area, or if you're looking at microscopic images where every single detail is so important, and which is why the authors themselves submit high resolution photos in order to support the findings of their papers, you would be able to get those same high resolution images by going to this HTML format as compared to PDF, right? So also there's the reference list at the bottom, whereby if there are direct links, it will immediately bring you to those, even if those articles are not published on Springerlink. Okay. So I think what's also important to note is that if you were using citation tools, so you could also use the platform in order to download a citation file. So very simply, just click on this. You can then just download the citation based on the format that you're looking for, then upload that file itself into your manuscript manager, things like ReadCube, Mendeley, etc., whichever ones you're using to help you best organize your list of literature review or your list of papers that you're going to be using for your citations. Okay. Well, yes, I forgot as well. All the way at the bottom of the article itself, there is this share this article. So we call this a share it link. Basically what it does, it allows you as an authenticated user to be able to obtain a shareable link that you could copy and share this exact file that you are reading and looking at right now with someone else. Perhaps, for example, you may have a colleague, a research colleague that is from a different university, from a different part of the world, and maybe they're not as fortunate as you to be able to have access to this particular article, but you thought that this would be a good opportunity to share this so that you could formulate some ideas by communicating with them about your research in the future. So in order to avoid the problem of piracy and what usually in the past you would have to download a copy and send it to them, making sure, or borrow a copy officially from the library, we've now provided this feature where you could just copy this link and then share it send it through social media or send it in the email. Hey, why don't you take a look at this article, perhaps read it out just before our next meeting and we can discuss further. This really helps to provide for this concept of open science that Springer Nature is really pushing for, where we try not to prove as a hindrance to research itself. So if anyone within the group has access to an article still be shared legally without any copyright issue to the rest of them who do not necessarily have access. Okay, so those are some of the important features to note. And then lastly, what everybody usually tends to go for is click on this very bright blue and big download PDF button. Okay, so which I'll do that right now. And this, as you can see, will give you a copy of the text, all right, of the PDF. So it's not to say that PDFs are not great. In fact, they serve a good function themselves. First and foremost is usually they are typically very small in file size, easy to share with. Our PDFs also do not have DRM. So it's actually what that means is that, for example, you would like to cite a particular paragraph from this paper or to just rewrite some of it. No DRM means you could actually copy. For example, I'm not asking you to do this, but for example, the text on the file itself is readable and is selectable. So you can actually go ahead and, for example, if you want to isolate a certain image or paragraph in your works, you could do so by using PDF copy. And then all of the formatting will still remain. There's another feature on the cross-ref on the PDF file itself, which is this cross-ref feature. If you click on it, you will be able to get information on the timeliness or up-to-dateness of this particular manuscript itself, whether or not, for example, is this the current copy? Has there been revisions made? Is there a newer version that perhaps I should be reading rather than this one that has perhaps already been retracted, etc. This is what cross-mark does. Very simply, just click on it and you will bring it here. It will tell you, yes, this document is the latest version, is current, etc. Okay. PDFs also have the metadata within them. So if you were to download a copy of this PDF, for example, and upload a copy of it into your manuscript manager, again, like your Mendeley, your review, or your EndNote, it would have all of the embedded metadata in it still functioning. For example, what that means is, for example, any of the citations that have been listed by the author are still working. The links to them are working. And if you click on them, you either be redirected to the reference itself, which is found on either Springerlink or even externally on different hosting sites like Wiley Online Library, or Tim Francis Online, or etc. Okay, so as a reminder, our PDFs are DRM free. They are also unlimited. They're also ready for unlimited print and download. They're great access for, again, sharing with your classmates, sharing with your fellow researchers, with your research group, your lab, and don't have to worry about things copyright. If there were color images, they would remain colored within the PDF itself. So again, that helps to provide greater detail, especially when those details, it's just a difference between yellow or orange in the image, plays a very important role itself. Okay, so maybe what I would do is I would just check with Mabel. Mabel, do we have any questions? Or maybe perhaps this would be a good
so far
I perhaps just see whether there are any questions.
Yeah, so far I don't see any question in the chat box. No, sorry, I've got one.
Okay.
Does Springerlink have article translate function? For example, from English to Arabic?
Okay, so I think I'm not exactly sure of the question in terms of whether do you mean translating perhaps, for example, this article that was published in English into Arabic. If that was your question, then I believe the answer is no. We, in fact, have only, I think, very few languages found on the platform itself. One of them, mainly and the vast majority, over maybe 90% of the content is in English, and that is because that's usually the most accepted global language in terms of scientific literature. There are certain German and I think Latin language titles, which means all of the publications in those titles are following those languages, but that's because usually that journal was started hundreds of years ago publishing in German or in Latin, and they've continued to do so up to today. As for if you were, for example, saying that if you were writing manuscript and you wanted to and you were perhaps writing it in your mother tongue, and if your mother tongue was Latin or Spanish or German, or in your case the question Arabic, is there a service in order to translate that from Arabic to English? And the answer to that is actually there is, but it's a separate service offered by Springer Nature as a whole. Maybe if I'm not mistaken, this is under the research, the Nature research side. So if you're looking for more information on that, perhaps you could, if you're looking for more information on that particular service, it is like this. It's not necessarily handled by myself or Mabel. It's handled by our colleagues on the different side of the topic. But if you're interested in finding out more about those, especially language translation services, maybe perhaps just leave a note on the chat box, and then maybe Mabel and I can get back to you with more information on that later.
Yeah, Kent, if you don't mind me give extra explanation on this. I think translation really depends on what the purpose of the translation. If just as Kent said, if you want to polish or translate your original manuscript or book or whatever article into English, we have a service, like Kent said, under Nature Research Group. But if you are really looking for publishing with Springer Nature, sometimes our editors also look at the primary research of that particular articles or books. And if our editors think that it's very, have a global perspective or very interest to our global readers, they also have a cooperation or partnership with the authors or societies to translate some of the books into English. But I have your question, so maybe we can discuss it further after this presentation. Yeah, Ken, you can go on.
No other questions, right? Okay, so no. I'll just proceed. Yeah, great. Thank you for that question, by the way. And if you have any more other questions, not necessarily related to exactly what I'm showing you, for example, like the features that I'm showing off the platform, but you have questions about Springer Nature itself, please always feel free to write them down in the chat box, and perhaps depending whether or not I know the information more, or perhaps even Mabel knows it a little bit better, I can always go ahead and answer you as well. So feel free to use this session as well as to get to know Springer Nature. If you have any burning questions about Springer Nature, not necessarily about Springerlink or the journals or the books, go ahead and write them down in the chat box so we can also solve them for you. Okay, so moving on. So at this point, when we started with this topic about environmental impact of overfishing, etc., and I've gone through this process of the funnel effect, where starting at looking at just journals and seeing whether or not, and are there any kinds of journals, in fact, even in the area that I'm looking at. I've done through this step-by-step process. Yes, I found that there are journals that are looking at, but perhaps maybe there will be a lot of times where you encounter, okay, not necessarily the journal title seems right, or there are a few journal titles that seem right, but not necessarily exactly what I'm looking for, very, very, very specific. So then what I would then tend to do is I could then continue to search the journal itself. So by clicking on the search function earlier, so let me just repeat that. So your homepage of the journal, you see on the top right hand side, there's a search feature, you click on it. What that does is that now the platform is now helping you to search any specific queries that you may have in this journal itself, reviews of fish biology, right? So this is then where I think this is really then the right time to really drill down a little bit more specific on exactly what some of the terms that you may be looking for. So perhaps maybe I can use a search term, for example, fish populations, right? And overfishing, for example. Right. So through this very simple process, and this is also where you start to have a little trial and error, and you play around with the search bar over here, where you ensure that the search terms that you're using, for example, fish populations, are exactly the terms that you're looking for. So if I go ahead and put fish, inverted commas, and overfishing inverted commas, what I will again get is 30 different articles from this fish reviews of in fish biology and fisheries. And that perhaps helps me to again save time instead of reading 1,000 over abstracts to figure out whether or not they are relevant or not. Let the platform, through the formula of searching, help you to narrow down to just 30. Now 30 is quite manageable for some. Some of us may think that nope, this is only one journal and 30 is still too much. What you can do is you can always then play around with the search feature. So by just using the different search queries, for example, fish population, overfishing, or an N, you will get different kinds of results, right? So what you saw earlier was fish populations and overfishing. So that meant that, show you, that meant that each and every one of these articles, that there is these two specific terms located within that article, right? So you're very sure that the term fish populations and overfishing are found in each and every one of these articles. If I had removed this inverted commas, right? Essentially what I will be searching, and you can see that the results get even more larger, 711, is that I'm actually searching for, in reality, fish and populations and over and fishing. Right? So that's actually what you are doing by not including the inverted commas. So again, this is why I mentioned from the very beginning, if you're not exactly sure what you are doing when you're keying in the search queries into the search bar, it's very, very dangerous. And what tends to happen is a lot of frustration when either A, you don't find anything at all, or you find too much and they're not very relevant to what you're looking for. Okay? So that's an example of how to use N and then the commas to get specific terms. I'll show you now the OR, for example. Okay. So OR can, so in 354 of these different articles from this journal, there is either the term fish populations or the term overfishing in them. So you tend to have to play around with this a little bit. This is where it really starts to get more hands, where you think about your title, think about the context. Don't always use the exact same terms that you find on the title itself. So I can, for example, I found fish populations. My title had fish population, environmental impact on native fisheries in coast of Malaysia. So maybe if I put Malaysia, not many will come out of it. Yeah. Oh, let's change that to N because I think I want to find more specific. And I only get 15. And if I perhaps try, for example, South Asia, I will get a different set of results. So this is where you really have to play around and really know your title and the context of what you're looking for as well. Okay, so from there, hopefully that then provides you again a little bit more background to what you're looking for. And if you encounter a situation where this is always 0 or near to 0 of whatever you're looking for, then perhaps maybe this journal itself is not suitable. What you can then do is very quickly just say, stop searching this within this journal. And what Springerlink would do is actually pull out that and say, and then it would now search for those terms, everything on all 13 million different scientific documents that I mentioned that are available on Springerlink itself. So by doing so, in the very beginning, from the front page, if I had used the search bar, if I keyed in these terms, I would have arrived at 224 different articles. But what we will then see is that if you look at the filter function on the left-hand side, you can see that the article count versus the chapter count is quite different. You're not necessarily only going to be able to see individual journal articles. You're going to see chapters from different books that are also touching the topic. You will also see articles or books, journals or books that are involved in the area of, for example, history and philosophy, which again may or may not be relevant to what you're looking for. So the search functionality, the search bar functionality, and how I showed you earlier about funneling down what you're looking for, going into the context of the subject area, are two different ways of looking at the same problem, but ultimately you would need both of them to really help you to define what exactly is best for you when doing. So in reality, this takes a little bit of time, but after getting the hang of it for a while and knowing what you know, and you should be the most expert person in the world about your particular topic. After a while, after a few rounds of playing around with Springerlink and the other platforms, you then begin to really know where you would be able to find what you're always looking for, right? So hopefully that is some of the tips that I want to show you. And Chris, perhaps quickly, because I think we have a few minutes left, I'm going to take the opportunity to show you the other example, which is touching more on the social sciences side. So this topic, it touches on consumer receptiveness, online marketing, converting leads, etc., etc. More on the business side, e-commerce, for example, marketing. So what I could do, if I go back to the homepage in Springerlink, if I were to want to perhaps gain a better understanding of the entire subject area itself, rather than looking at specific types of this, maybe what I can do is just go to the different subject matters itself. So for me, maybe it's in business and management. You will arrive again at this results page where you should filter your subdiscipline. For example, if I look at that marketing, for example, I narrow it down to marketing. And at this particular moment, maybe I'm only looking at books, so I can filter books as well. All right. So then that's where I can see different kinds of books, the different types of topics that are discussed in these books that perhaps may be again relevant to what I'm looking for. Another thing to point out that I didn't mention earlier is that there is this include preview only content. So when you are doing your search, everything that I've just exemplified, after you've logged into your UMTG proxy, your search results may or may not necessarily be exactly the same as what you see on the screen, especially after you have unchecked the box. So what this box does is actually, when it is unchecked, it means that it will only return the results from your search query. For me at this moment is in the topic of business and management for marketing, and I'm only looking at books. I get 2,938 results. For you, that may be different depending on the subscription and the availability of the titles at your library. So don't be afraid. Don't be wondering if you've done something wrong if you followed exactly what I did and you don't exactly come up with the same number of search results, because that again depends on the subscription that you get from your library. Okay, so going back to the book, so just take this opportunity as well to show you the slight differences between a journal article and a book and its chapters. So I'm just going to use one of these, for example, marketing channels and supply chains in North America. If you click into it, you can see this is the book homepage, where it provides you a roughly similar, but again slightly different through the journal homepage. So you get the book front cover. If you see a physical copy in the library, this is what it looks like. You get the title itself, you get the authors, you can see who they're affiliated with, from which university. You may be familiar with, maybe following a particular author itself. All right, so you can see which, for example, what areas does this book touch on. So for us, this is under the business and management category. You can see information on how many times this book was downloaded. But here is where it gets a little bit different as compared to a journal, right? So a book is typically divided into different chapters, right? And a journal is divided into each volume, and each volume has different articles within it, and they may all be different depending on the publication of that time. So for a book, you can either download the entire book itself. For this book, there are 5 chapters, or you could download the individual chapters of the book if you're only intending to read or to use that chapter. So this can be quite useful, especially when, although this book is quite a small book with only 5 chapters, For example, if you're looking at an entire encyclopedia which has thousands of pages and hundreds of chapters, you may not necessarily want to download a copy that is perhaps 5 gigabytes of size. Although you could, doesn't necessarily mean you want to, because you're only really looking at a few pages. So we've actually added a function into the platform where you could download individual PDFs of the books, right? So you can choose a PDF or an EPUB version if you're using different device, for example, like Kindle, right? And you can search within the book itself. So if you have a certain query like online marketing, we try, right? And then what happened is there are 4 different chapters within this 5-chapter book that touches on the term online marketing. Okay, so if I just go into one, I can see the abstract of the book, the abstract of the chapter, and also the actual text of the chapter itself. Now, this is a fairly recent publication, so this was only published not more than just over a month ago. But in older books, you may not necessarily see a HTML version of the chapter. You will maybe sometimes be asked to immediately download a copy of the book or the chapter itself. And this is due to some of these titles that we have on Springerlink are as old as 200 over years old. So they are not yet translated into online, but they have already been scanned and they've come up with a machine readable version. That is what exactly you are downloading when you have downloaded a chapter. Okay, right? So just when you're at the chapter itself, so you also have the functionality of scrolling through the different sections of the chapter. There's a cite functionality over here, depending on what tools you're using. So again, is it Mendeley, EndNote, or etc. And just to be very careful as well, this link here on the right hand side says download book. This means the entire book. If you want to download just this specific chapter, you would then have to go back to the homepage here and then click the individual download PDF for this chapter. Okay, yeah. So I wanted to show you a little bit about more functionality about a book. So, but this particular book doesn't have that function, doesn't have that data. So I'm going to very quickly browse to a different book to show you some. To look at slightly to show you some interesting features on a book that is not usually found on other kind of book resources found on the internet. Just going to use an engineering book, for example. Okay. Let's see what is a good spot title. Okay, let's try this one. Electromagnetic Smith. Okay, this one does not as well. I know of a book that was published by UMT author, so I think sorry, spelled wrong. So, landscape. Sorry, just bear with me a moment. There we go. Greater Kanye landscapes. Yeah. So in this book, for example, you can see that this is a book that is actually published by us, by authors from UMT. And this book actually has 3 different citations. And there are other books that are showing, for example, how many times they've been cited, downloaded, how many times it's been retweeted, etc., etc. And all of them you will see on this general area over here. So we've actually built in this functionality to a book. This is good for all those of you who are intending to publish a book as well in the future, that you could actually get to see besides your book. So the often misconception is that journals are the only ones that people tend to utilize for citations, but that's very, very untrue. And Springer Nature has actually been trying very hard to give more accreditation and also give more credit to book authors itself by having to come up with features like this to showcase who else are using your books in terms of citing them in other research papers or utilizing them in official government enacted laws, or have they been mentioned on any social media? Have they been tweeted about by who in which part of the world? So there are certain features that are also added on to our books that are slightly different than the journals. The journals are not measured like that because they have the impact factor associated with them, and that helps measure the kinds of utilization and also popularity of the and recognition of the manuscript itself. Okay, so this is basically an example of a book, right? So similarly, you can see the introduction, information about a book. This book has 24 chapters, and like I said, you can download individual chapters as well. Okay, so I think in view of time, I think for now we will just leave. We will pretty much stop here. But basically, I've covered the vast majority of the functionalities and the things that you would tend to need to do when trying to do your research in order to do that literature review part, that research part a little bit better, quicker. Hopefully, after some practice, you'll be quite a good master at it. Always make sure to log in through your easy proxy to ensure that you are logging in correctly as an authenticated user. I think most university libraries now are also adopting a federated access. So that means usually logged into one platform correctly, you'll also be able to log into other platforms correctly without having to go through the same process. Just be reminded just to check whether or not you're correctly logged in by this purple or orange bar. Purple means you're correctly logged in, you're a recognized user. You can also check at the bottom whether or not you are associated with UMT, for example. Okay, so I just want to leave you with a few more touch points before we end the session, or I hand it back to Mabel. One of them is actually.
Sorry, because there is a question.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, but I'm not sure if it is asked for us. I mean, it is appropriate for us to answer. It's about the book publishing. So the question is, how do I get invited in book chapter published by Springerlink? How do they get the invitation to publish in book chapter?
I see. Well, I am not exactly an expert in this matter. However, after speaking to many of our book publishing editors that are based also here in Southeast Asia, there are generally two ways about it. Don't quote me necessarily, but I believe this is quite a standard practice, especially within Springerlink. One of the ways is obviously the editor himself, if he comes up with an idea or he works with a primary author on a particular subject area that he thinks is void in the market at the moment. So there is, let's say in the world of inorganic chemistry, and there's a particular area not being discussed heavily enough, there are not enough books, or there are a lot of journals but not a lot of books in that area. Our book editors would typically go out and look for the best experts that they can find of that area and try and invite them to either contribute an entire monograph, or maybe you are an expert in this area, so you contribute a chapter, and then a different person, a different professor is expert in a different area and he contributes a chapter. So that's one way. So you would the editor themselves actually goes out, and this is what our editors actually do. They're very active in the market. They do visit lots of universities. We've in fact been part of several visiting editors from Springerlink to UMT in the past as well, where they go there and they look for who they think are the most suitable authors to invite them to do it, to write those papers, to write those chapters. Second way is that actually if you think there is a need for a particular area and you feel that it's not being touched on or nobody's contributing to that area of science, you could actually submit a proposal to editors to discuss on whether or not you could write a book or a chapter. You could suggest yourself and your colleagues in different areas, or you have a a fellow professor in a different university who's maybe taking care a little bit more on the humanistic side of that area or the economic side of that area, and see whether or not propose that to our editors, and then see whether or not the editor thinks that that's a great idea and you guys can work on it. So it's generally two-way. There are two ways to it. Either they go out and they find you and by chance they say, hey, I think you're the best person, can you write it? And then you decide yes or no. Or if you think there is a need for it, you can also submit a proposal. And our editors do accept, are always on the lookout for great ideas on how to, or for new books, etc. So hopefully that answers that question. Mabel?
Yeah. Yeah, there is only one question. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So like I said, just before we end, just want to touch on a few things. So Springer Nature, the namesake says that we are also responsible for the publication of the Nature Journal. So hopefully a lot of you are familiar with this title or this name, this brand. So the Nature Journal, so this is the #1 multidisciplinary scientific journal, really high impact factor, and everything that's published in it is highly influential and very fundamental to every single one of us in the world. This particular platform itself, nature.com, is publicly available. But at the moment, Nature is not necessarily subscribed at UNT. However, due to the coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic that's going around the world, and because a lot of research is actually published in Nature branded journals, Springer Nature has actually made the decision to make a lot of our coronavirus related content now freely and publicly available. And this again is to assist in the whole world, actually, to overcome this great problem that we have in the year of 2020. So if you're ever looking for information, you can either go to nature.com and just look at coronavirus related content. So for example, this one, coronavirus black hot mystery, or you can just Google Springer Nature, or maybe we can send you some of this information in the follow-up email that will include the survey. And you can actually scroll through here and see all of the different individual articles itself published on Nature, on Springer, on BMC, or any other of our platforms for absolutely free, because we are trying to contribute. Everybody is trying to contribute in order to solve this great big problem. On top of that, Nature itself, the Nature platform itself, actually has two open access journals. The first of which is Scientific Reports here. So this is a fully open access journal that basically it accepts a very wide variety of topics, and its qualification manuscripts accepted is basically sound science, meaning as long as the research behind the science is solid, papers are accepted into this particular journal regardless of its topic itself. The second one is actually Nature Communications. So it's there you go, Nature Communications. So this is also an open access journal where it accepts different types of papers as well. So they're both high impact factor papers, but they're both open access. And regardless of whether or not your university library has a subscription to them, you can already immediately go in and utilize any of these journals, both of these journals and the contents within them, on top of the free coronavirus content that are published in other paid for, other subscription-based Nature branded journals. So in overall, I think there are literally thousands of articles free at the moment inside both Springer and Nature and BMC that you could utilize if you're trying to read up on that area as well, or if somehow you are related to the effort to combat COVID-19. And lastly, we've also made an initiative, because a lot of us are now forced to work from home, do research from home. If you are also a lecturer or a student, you're probably facing difficulties with primary reading material. So for example, textbooks. Springer Nature has also made 500 English language textbooks, some of our most popular, most utilized textbooks globally, freely available until July, if I'm not mistaken. So you could go into Springerlink itself, search for the title, and then download a copy for yourself. And hopefully that will help just tide over this time where a lot of us, I guess, are struggling with working from home or studying from home or researching from a distance situation. So I believe we can also send you information about this, or all you have to do is just Google Springer Nature free textbooks. You'll come to this site, you'll be able to download the title list, and all you have to do is just go back to Springerlink, search for the title itself exactly word by word like how I taught you, and then get a copy for yourself. You'll have that copy forever, right? So I hope this is also good news for the library. It helps to contribute whatever we can in order to support everyone through this difficult time, right? And with that said, I want to thank you for your time and your patience. And if you have more questions, feel free to send them in now. If not, I think you can always write to your librarian or write to us directly so we can help answer any questions, even if they're not related to the platform itself. Anything to do with Springer Nature. If we're not the right people, we'll try to find the right appropriate person to get your queries answered. Okay. So with that said, I'm going to pass the session back to Mabel.
Thank you, Ken. Through training on the Springerlink as well as nature, you can always send us your questions if you don't have it right now, but we are always here to answer your questions. From the questions we receive, we understand that you are not just looking for the useful resources for your research or study, but also looking for opportunity to publish your findings to the public. So we are planning a publishing talk for Southeast Asia in mid-June, and definitely we will invite UMT researchers or authors to join. So please keep an eye on our announcement or from UMT Library announcement on the date of the publishing talk. Last but not the least, after this presentation, you will receive an email in which will include a certificate of attending this training as well as a survey. Really appreciate if you can spend a few minutes to fill in the survey, because that will help us understand the situation, especially under COVID-19, and how Springer Nature can support you in the future. I don't see any questions. So if there is no more questions, thank you very much for attending this training. Looking forward to talk to you in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good day and stay safe.
Bye-bye.
Bye.